name's Leigh, and I'm the head behavioural linguist at South Africa's first behavioural linguistics firm called Breadcrumbs Linguistics. And really, we are seeing such exciting stuff in the space whereby business has become so behavioural. You can have the best product, you can have the best UX, you can have the best communication, but ultimately, if you're not able to compel someone to choose you, and of course, there's very many ways that you can do that, you've kind of lost any type of competitive advantage. So as part of what I want to be chatting to you guys about today, it's really how are we making decisions as consumers? And it's so wonderful to actually take a step back from your brand and your business and think about how you're doing this yourself when you're faced with a decision-making opportunity. From the moment you wake up in the morning to the moment you go to sleep, there are thousands and thousands of decisions you're making. And quite interestingly, you're not just competing, I guess, as a brand or a business with somebody who's in your category. You are competing for attention in your consumer's mind. So whether you're a bank or an insurer or a retailer, if somebody has already almost saturated the amount of decisions they need to make in that day, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to compel them to ultimately choose you. And we are in such a noisy space at the moment. I would argue particularly more so now that it's COVID times and we are expected to be online so much more. So it's work sort of pressures, it's social pressures online. Of course, all of the social media noise that we get interrupted with on a daily basis. And we're really presented with so many different things that are trying to vie for our attention. And certainly in our breadcrumb space, we call it the thumb stop moment. Has a brand or business communicated something to you in such a way that you will stop, pause, and engage? Because ultimately, if you don't do that, whether it's a subject line, whether it's listening to a sort of radio script or a TV script to sell you something, if you haven't stopped to engage with it, it's very unlikely that you then get led, I guess, with these sort of breadcrumb navigation moments to the point of then choosing to purchase or being persuaded to buy into whatever that brand or product or service is. Off the back of this is really this, broad-based claim that we are all lazy as a sort of human species, really. And one of the wonderful things of the behavioral world is that a lot of these principles transcend some of the demographic factors that play such a big role in our communications and in the various ways that we speak about brands and businesses. And so whilst hyper-personalization and tailoring your communication is very critical to the work that certainly I'm looking at from a research point of view and the work that Breadcrumbs does, there is also this underlying sort of assumption that there are biases and what we call cognitive heuristics that we apply to our lives, no matter what language we speak or what sort of walk of life we're in or what our demographic background is. And one of the key parts of this is that you don't have time when you're talking to your consumer. You know your consumer is a bit lazy. So you really do have to make any type of touch point that you have super easy to understand, very short, relevant. It's International Plain Language Day today, remarkably, so 13th of October in our calendars as International Plain Language Day. And really there are such critical things as part of those, the sort of principles that come through, and not just from a communications point of view, but ultimately every single touch point you have with a consumer, that things need to be super, super easy. Otherwise, people are just going to ignore you. So very briefly back to this, and this should look quite overwhelming on your screen, so don't stress if you can't read any of the detail here. As per our last count, I think these are 188 cognitive biases or heuristics or rules of thumb that we rely on to make decisions. And it's often quite a subliminal thing. We're not aware that we're doing it, which really does link to this idea of behavioral economics or behavioral science being something that certainly has patterns, but there's a lot of irrationality in that. Why aren't we saving more for retirement? Why aren't we buying products that are contributing to sort of greener, more environmental futures for ourselves? Why are we not exercising enough? And a lot of these core concerns that really help shape a healthy, sort of longer life and a happier life for us are things that we don't often do. And it really does link to some of these biases that we just, we're almost stuck in these patterns. So we make decisions based on those biases, of course. And if as a brand or a business, you can tap into some of these insights and understand this is how consumers think, this is how they process information, and this is ultimately how we can lead them to make a decision, then we can start talk nudging. And just from a theoretical point of view, without going into too much academic detail here, it stems from this idea of libertarian paternalism. And what that essentially means is, sure, we're nudging, we're guiding, but it's a very gentle power of choice architecture that ultimately helps get a consumer from point A to point B. And there's, where it aligns to that end user's best interests and aligns to a brand or an organization's best interests, that's the sweet spot. As a very small caveat, from a breadcrumbs point of view, we're very passionate about nudging for social good. And certainly the stuff that we get involved with really has to benefit the end user. And sometimes there's a bit of a gray area in terms of that. But as I said, the sweet spot really is where an organization sees value and then the end user also has their best interests being sort of represented and prioritized. So as part of what we're going to be chatting to today, I want to take a trip with you all, and we are going to suspend any type of reality and pretend that we're able to get on a flight and travel to New York City. And as part of the sort of journey we're going to go on, I would like to take you through a couple of behavioral science principles that have been applied through the process of our sort of travel trip to really just make it a lot more tangible to you to see what is happening behind the scenes. How are we being persuaded to make certain decisions? What are those pulls and levers that are sort of playing out? Certainly from a point of view of being aware of them, I think agency, and to refer back to Professor Sandra's point about very active choice, that's a core part of sort of behavioral science, and understanding that you are gently being shown a route, but at no point is anyone sort of mandating anything or saying that you have to take this price point or choose this brand or opt for this service. So in terms of the first part of our trip to New York City, we need to book flights. And for those of us on a wonderful wellness program, we know that we get boosts, discounts, flight discounts, and upfront discounts, which I think is so critical, because we really are sort of creatures of immediate gratification. And where you can give someone an upfront incentive for some reason, it's far more likely that they are going to pay attention to what the brand offers or the service, and then, of course, choose you as the preferred air carrier in this case. So we're going to choose British Airways purely because we qualify for 30% discounts on international flights. And really a big part of, again, choosing BA here is based on the fact that incentives motivate us to act. Of course, incentives don't just need to be extrinsic sort of financial rewards. They can be intrinsic, but in the context of our trip, we're saying, here's a cool discount, choose BA, and we're going to get ourselves to New York City. We're now choosing accommodation, and I wish that there's a world where I would be staying in accommodation that looks like that, Empire State in the background. If any of you have used bookings.com, you will know the fear of losing out from a behavioral principle known as scarcity. And what happens here is it'll pop up when you choose your hotel and it'll say 2 bedrooms left, or 2 beds left, actually. They actually refer to the beds. And there's it pops up in red, and it's really something that you see in your browser. And it almost drives this urgency of, I need to book this now, because if I don't at the special price, I'm going to miss out. So really, there's also this FOMO that comes through at this point. And the principle here really is scarcity can drive sales. The less there is of something, the more we want it, and the more excited we are for getting it. And certainly from a behavioral and an action point of view, the more likely we are to act quite quickly to get it. All right, so we've now got we've landed in New York, we've got our amazing accommodation, we've decided we're now going out to a restaurant on the first night. And restaurant, sort of the choice architecture from a behavioral point of view in restaurants is something that is so absolutely fascinating. And we could speak this whole session just about restaurants. But the example that I want to take us through is the principle of anchoring. So if any of you are wine drinkers, probably most of us, and it's almost time for a glass of wine. I'm not sure if anyone's already having one back in your sort of home environment. But when the wine list is presented to you in a restaurant environment, a lot of careful thought has gone into the price points that are being used there. And there's this behavioral principle of anchoring, where almost like a Goldilocks effect of not too hot, not too cold. And this might be resonating with you if you are a wine drinker. You'll open up the wine menu and you'll see maybe the cheapest wine on the menu and the most expensive, and you will sort of gravitate to the average costing there. And that's really because we've been anchored on what the top price is and the, you know, the most affordable prices. And for various reasons, whether it's, and it's not even if you're sitting with other people you're trying to impress. So let's say we're all together, maybe there's a bit of like, okay, I don't want to be choosing the cheapest wine on the menu. Which again, it's a sort of a rational thought to have. You're in a New York restaurant, whatever you order is going to be good enough. But I challenge you the next time you even by yourself and ordering something off the wine menu to see how easy it is to sort of route to that middle point. And restaurants very strategically know that we do this, and as a result would be more likely to put sort of the more popular wines, I guess, within that middle category, or certainly wines that they're trying to move if they've got a lot of them on the shelves. And certainly I have to actively remind myself, go for the cheapest wine. It's actually probably going to be better in quality than the sort of next range up. But again, it's this anchoring bias that we just feel so compelled to go for that middle Goldilocks effect. All right, so we've now had our wonderful dinner, we've woken up the next morning, and we are going to do some shopping. This is absolutely my favorite bookstore in New York City. If you're ever lucky enough to visit that city, I would recommend going to the Strand bookstore. It's known as the nudgiest bookstore in the world, and for very good reason. As you walk in, there's all types of wayfinders and sort of behavioral linguistics at play to try and encourage you to buy certain things. And also, I mean, a bookstore can be quite overwhelming. So there certainly is an attempt here to help you make a decision as you're walking around the store. The one principle I want to pull out here is what's called messenger effect. And in fact, Professor Sandra alluded to credibility and trust coming through from who sends a message to you. And we see this at play in a big way in this bookstore. You have things like suggested by President Obama on one of the books. We have staff who've actually handwritten personalized reviews of books that they've read and enjoyed. And it really just is a nudgy way of introducing a different brand voice. If you think, in fact, of some other examples in our own space, you've got Megan from Mr. Delivery, Andile from Pick and Pay ASAP now, Harold from Net Florist. These are all personas or even real life people that are playing the role of messenger and certainly have that credibility or that trust factor that you can then use to compel people to choose what it is you want them to choose. All right, so we've now bought our gifts to take back to South Africa after our trip. We've realized restaurants are far too expensive, especially since we probably anchored on the middle price of wine. So we've now lost a lot of rands in this trip. So we are going to shop for some groceries for one of our penultimate nights in the city. And we go to a place called Trader Joe's, which incidentally is also an amazingly nudgy grocery store. And what Trader Joe's is so brilliant with is that they know people don't want to make decisions. And if they can take the heavy lifting out of the decision-making process, you're A, more likely to buy something from them, and B, not make a poor decision in that purchasing process. This links to something called the jam study, where retailers tested how many pots of jam on a grocery shelf was sort of the right number of jams, such that you still felt agency in making a choice. Because you don't want to just walk in and be told this is the only jam you can buy. You want to still feel that you're making some type of decision, but not too many jams that it's so overwhelming. It's already like 6 p.m. and the last thing you feel like doing is making a decision about jam, that you walk out the store having not purchased the jam. So Trader Joe's really has understood that you should not have more than sort of 4 or 5 category items on the shelf. And as a result of that, they saw an immediate boost in sales just from having taken away some of that decision fatigue, which is just really something that none of us want to have to deal with. Okay, so we did some grocery shopping and we realized we didn't really want to be cooking in our Airbnb accommodation. And so for our last night, we are just going to do a bit of takeout, and we pick up our phone because, of course, we're in an unfamiliar, uncertain situation. We know we want pizza, but we're not too sure where to go or what to buy. And almost immediately looking through Yelp and Google and all these amazing sort of review sites, we hear about Famous Joe's Pizza, which arguably is the most famous pizzeria in, if not New York, certainly in the West Village. And as part of this, we see what's called social proofing, where we are following the herd who have already given credibility to this pizzeria. And through many, many reviews, in fact, last counts, just as an aside, I checked earlier, they had tens of thousands of reviews for this pizzeria. We are more likely to then make that decision because we're a bit unfamiliar with this, choosing which pizzeria we want to go to. Added to that, you arrive at Joe's Pizzeria, and because it's so famous, there's celebrities that adorn the walls. They've all taken selfies or they've taken photos, Polaroids, and up on the walls, suddenly we now see the likes of Leo DiCaprio, Hugh Jackman, huge names who've actually come to this Joe's Pizzeria. And that's an additional layer of social proofing, that we've made the right decision choosing this because other people, influential celebrities, have also done the same. All right, so for my last couple of minutes, this is a summary of the behavioral sales principles I've taken you through today, and there's 6 of them. So you'll recall that from an incentive offer point of view, having that upfront wellness program or rewards program linked to loyalty especially, not only gets people to choose you for sort of ad hoc moments, but actually it builds that engagement and that loyalty with you and your brand. So certainly thinking about how you can bring incentives into this sort of behavioral business space is a critical part of making those sales. And just back to the point that it doesn't need to be these expensive things. There's actually even a semantic difference between nudges and financial incentives. You can be looking at more intrinsic rewards that really make people feel like a hero or make them feel like advocates of a brand and showcase them as heroes. And that's just another way of doing it without having to worry about spending too much money here. Scarcity bias, quite clearly, when something's less available or it's limited edition, we suddenly feel like there's so much more perceived value. And as a result, we might act more quickly. Just a little caveat here, actually, bookings.com got in a bit of trouble from the European regulators because what was being found is actually that there was unethical play here where there were more beds available, but it was being positioned as a sort of, there's only 1 or 2. And a lot more regulations are coming into play when it comes to how you use these behavioral principles. And the caveat there is, of course, these are great things to use, but they have to be based in authenticity and credibility and truth. Otherwise, it's really just not something that brands should be doing. Anchoring effect, your wine. You're going to go for the middle of the road, and that's really just because we don't want to take any type of extreme position either way, as a sort of stereotypical generalization for most people. Messenger effect, who is the person doing the communicating? Is it your brand CEO, your business CEO? Is it, are you finding a great customer to be the voice of your brand? Is it an ambassador? Who are these influential voices that can ultimately persuade you to do something that maybe just from the marketing team wouldn't have been able to? And it adds that personal layer as well. Choice overload. We don't want to make decisions when we're presented with far too many options. We want to feel like it's an easy process. We want to be guided through it, yet we still want the agency of having active choice, which is just such a critical balance to get right here. So by all means, have a few ranges and a few product lines and a few different services, but when that starts becoming multiples upon multiples, just know that you're giving your consumer an added layer of complexity that they might not be able to navigate. And then to summarize with social proofing, probably one of my favorites actually to look at. And I think Professor Sandra also mentioned sort of 50 to 90% of people are going online to see if a brand or a service is one that's been spoken about and spoken about positively. Another piece of research showed that certainly when you have client testimonials on your website and move those up higher in the sort of the fold of the digital website, you're sort of 30% plus more likely to convert various sales. And so certainly we're looking to follow the herd, or at least have other people help make the decisions for us. and sort of put our trust in, yeah, the mass markets to decide who it is that we want to go with, whether it's a product or a service or a brand. And yes, in my time allocation, that is what I wanted to chat to you about. Certainly, there's a lot of behavioral principles that we can discuss. I mean, there was 188, as you saw from that initial cognitive bias wheel. But going through an idea of storytelling, and I'm sure that's been a prominent theme as part of your sales conference the past couple of days. You know, stories are far more memorable. Certainly from like a facts and data point of view, hopefully you walk away remembering our trip to New York from a flights, accommodation, restaurant, shopping in bookstores, grocery stores, and buying pizza, and try and see how you can apply some of those principles in your own space to nudge consumer action. Thank you.